to Blaze News, the mandate. It is day 64 here because we don't count weekends here on the mandate. I am Jill Savage, and back once again in his rightful chair, Matthew Peterson, editor-in-chief. We missed you yesterday.
Hey, we can't all be here at the same time. Lots of things going on. It's great.
And Chris Bedford holding down the fort once again. We're basically taking over his entire city. But thanks for allowing us to be here, at least for a few more days.
I will tell you that when I went to secret hideaways, I still beam in to Blaze News tonight. I don't skip.
That is true, but I had to just enjoy a beautiful drive to a secret hideaway and then immediately get to chatting with a bunch of interesting staffer types, and it was a great time.
Did you get to shoot any guns?
Nope, I had none of that. I just went in, I spoke to them, and then they had a lot of chats with me, a lot of interesting discussions. I took a nap and
Did
came
you
back.
even manage to drive a golf cart into a marsh?
Nope.
Then you haven't done it right. We got to go back.
I did not do any of the fun stuff whatsoever because I had to get back to do things for everyone here. And
we needed
do a bunch of interviews we did today, which were going to be incredible.
You did have to get back. Eventually, though, we will get you from a treehouse up there as well, much like we had Chris Bedford, I don't know, a few months ago in that same position. But let's go through and get to our day today, because we have had a full day already before we even get to tonight. We had Podcast Row. We'll say at the White House, it's technically the executive Eisenhower office building. It's right next door to the White House. So we're just going to say White House.
The White House complex.
Chris Bedford.
Campus is what the insiders call it.
Chris Bedford likes this building better, I am told.
Oh, yeah. It's nicer. It's cleaner. It's more ornate. It's better lit. I mean, the White House has done a lot of good work has been done in the White House in the last couple of years in particular. But I mean, it's still... mice and rats occasionally fall from the ceiling, sometimes into the press pool, which is hysterical and poetic and completely deserved. Like, oh, another one's joining the press pool. But here's the reason for it is that the president's in charge of when they want to do renovations, and no one wants to renovate the White House when they're in charge. Because, I mean, then the whole place would be a construction zone. So I think what they need to do, Trump probably needs to do, sorry, J.D. Vance, in the last 2 months, be like, we're renovating the White House. And then, it could be the next guy's problem.
Then it turns all gold and everything, and then his fingerprints are going to be all over this.
He added so much gold. I mean, that's what happened to Fort Knox, right? He added it to the Oval Office. He's overlaying most things in gold. It looks somewhere... It actually looks pretty great, but it's a lot of gold.
This sounds like something Trump would do. I mean, he cares about architecture. He talks about building all the time. He wants to make America's buildings beautiful again. And so I think it'd be a perfect fitting end to his presidency at the very end to say, now I'm going to refurbish the whole thing.
One of my favorite, there's not a lot of them, but an actually good Jon Stewart bit back when the first time Trump ran was he put up two different pictures. It was like, which one is a Trump residence and which one is a Saddam Hussein residence? There's all this, the gold, and it was a difficult game.
Yes, yeah. It always has been, but that is also why he's so beloved by so many people who associate in a very, very direct way, that as a statement of I made it, I'm wealthy, and that's his personal style, right? That's not necessarily what he'd do to the White House. I think there would be some of that. But some of that is okay. I think that of all people, I mean, I've never heard anyone say this before, to actually redo it, that he would be the guy. It's incredible. He also has all the great architects who want to do classic buildings, right?
Yes, he's been a huge supporter of making America beautiful again.
Yeah.
It's excellent, actually.
Well, unfortunately, we did not get to speak with President Trump ourselves, but our very own Glenn Beck was able to have his sit-down interview. It was the first exclusive interview for Donald Trump in his 100 days. Bedford was actually in the room when it happened. It was a great interview that Glenn got to do, the first one. Now, it's only day 64 here on the mandate. Again, we don't count weekends, but President Trump, he works all it
Yep, it was fun to be able to sit in there and to tune in as the president and Glenn were talking, and I was, they kind of broached on this, but Glenn wasn't originally a fan. I mean, the first time that I met him was on the campaign trail, primary trail in Iowa, and he was not out there stumping for Trump. But he said so. He said so during the interview that the president has shown that there's a number of things that he has changed Glenn's mind on, that he's come around. And actually, if you go back, I was looking at this yesterday and look at that original wall of shame, the cover of shame from National Review. How many of those names are Trump appointments? I mean, I've known him now for years, but Brent Bozell is MAGA as they get. He put his name on that sort of thing. So a lot of people have come around. A lot of people have changed. And that's one of the reasons why this second administration is so much more effective and efficient than the first administration, is how many people who've been convinced that he was right. And that's, we've talked about this for the Democrats. They need a figure like Donald Trump and otherwise they need a great man, a big politician, someone who's a real leader to be able to shift course. It doesn't just happen out of necessity. It happens with personality.
One of the things that's so interesting about Trump that doesn't fit with the negative personality that people associate, all the negatives they say. In fact, one of the things that doesn't fit with what many of those people thought of him in that initial National Review salvo against him is the fact that he doesn't actually hold grudges. And so with many of these people who said terrible things about Trump, including, J.D. Vance said some very harsh things about President Trump. Trump just doesn't hold the grudge. And it's like he said on the Fox program when they asked him about why he was RFK. RFK was suing him and why he was okay going down for Easter, right, to Palm Beach from New York in the private plane with RFK, who volunteered to bring his family down, even though they were in a brutal lawsuit. Why did you do that? How are you okay with that? And he said, if I didn't do that, I wouldn't have any friends.
I've been at the table with him where he pointed out someone who was also on that cover and said, "You didn't like me at first." No, you didn't. Yes. You remember? Yes. But you've come around. You've changed your mind. You're a very beautiful woman.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have always liked Chris Bedford. He will have our first exclusive interview from Podcast Row. Don't go anywhere. We'll have more right after this. We spend so much time looking for the truth in our headlines. How do we go through the grocery store, though, and just imagine that all of the meat that they serve there is just actually going through and actually going to be meat that you want to buy for you and yourselves and your family? No, it's not from the United States. Even if it says product of the United States on it, it's not. But this is why I buy from GoodRanchers.com, because it's meat that you can trust. You know that they don't have any of the hidden additives, any of the hormones, any of the seed oils, none of the stuff that you don't want. It's not in there anyways. It's just meat. And right now, you can spring into action. It's their special that they have going on right now. So when you subscribe to any of their boxes, you can go through and you can get free bacon, ground beef, chicken nuggets, or salmon in every order for a year, plus $40 off with my code Jill. Visit GoodRanchers.com for meat that you can trust. Don't forget, use my code Jill. Good Ranchers, American meat delivered. Well, earlier today, we got to go to Podcast Row out at the White House, and we got a ton of interviews that we'll be bringing to you today and the rest of the week into next week. It was a really exciting time, but let's go ahead and get right to our first one. Our Chris Bedford got to sit down with Customs and Border Patrol Senior Agent Ron Vitiello, and we all know that Donald Trump, the border, is one of his top priorities. So let's get right to the interview.
I'm joined now by Ron Vitiello, the Senior Advisor to Customs and Border Patrol and former Acting Director of Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
So you've been in this job before, or you've been in a similar work before, you've been an agent before, now you're advising. And I've seen some of your interviews where you talked about how the Biden administration seems to have been hiding some of the numbers. They seem to have been lying about some of the statistics, lying about the number of people who are coming over and what's happening to them. And we just ended up having a Freedom of Information Act request through the Government Accountability Project that found that neither ICE nor CBP have any information on which illegal immigrants have crossed the border who've actually joined the Selective Service, who've registered for Selective Service in the draft. Now, even with illegal immigrants, that is a felony, something that would make every military-aged male who came over the border a felon. But the Biden administration made no effort at all to enforce this, to record it, to have any data on this. Is this isolated, or is this something that you're coming across over and over again now that you're back after Biden's left?
No, it's clear that during the Biden administration, uncontrolled border was their goal, right? We had an invasion unlike we've ever seen before. And if you just use government numbers, and I know we're all a little bit skeptical of those numbers, but using Biden's own published numbers in public, 11 million encounters by CBP at the immediate border during the 4 years of the Biden administration. That doesn't count the number of people who they abused the parole system to fly into the United States, which weren't seen by law enforcement agents at the line, people who would be responsible for vetting them and making sure they weren't a threat to public safety.
Those are the nighttime flights that were going all over the country?
Right. And then you had, millions probably of gotaways, right? The known gotaways and the unknown gotaways. What does that mean? That means lots of people came to the border and were never seen by law enforcement and are now resident in the United States. And so things like registration, things like turning the CBP One app into the CBP Home app, all of that nonsense that was going on under Biden, those things are now being fixed. We now have CBP Home instead of CBP One. People are required, if they're in the country illegally, to register with the Department of Homeland Security. The Selective Service Registration is also a layer that could be put on top of their requirement in the U.S. For what reason? For the reason that if and when they get encountered by immigration officers in the United States, they can be prosecuted not only for being here without being invited, inspected, or within the law, but they can also be charged with these other crimes.
So that gets back to kind of the old Rumsfeld quote. You have the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns and the known knowns. And it seems like that the Biden administration was interested in hiding some of those numbers. That lends itself to the idea, and this was something the president pushed, but people are slow to believe it, that this was not something that was simply they didn't have the political willpower, the political capital to enforce the border with their own party. I mean, Biden was the only person who even was on the Democratic primary stage who wanted to keep laws about the border. Everyone else wanted to decriminalize it. But this lends itself to the idea that the administration was actively trying to facilitate illegal crossings. Is that the feeling that you've been getting?
100%. And here's an example. The Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, was the previous deputy secretary under the Obama administration when Joe Biden was the vice president. And during the 2014 surge, when I was still a government employee, we made recommendations to the Homeland Security office of the secretary and the deputy secretary how to fix the surge that was going on during 2014. They put those recommendations that we gave, myself, Tom Homan, and others, they took those recommendations and put them in place to reduce the number of people that were coming across the border illegally. Those steps worked, and we had better outcomes. Other things happened since, but they knew how to fix it. And Alejandro Mayorkas, as the secretary, watched what happened under the Trump administration, takes over as a secretary, and tears down all the things that were working during the previous 4 years. And so they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew when they took the steps that they took, what exactly was going to happen.
2014, that harkens back to the last time ICE had confirmed a Senate director through the Senate. Every time since 2017, since Obama left office, has been acting. What's the dysfunction that creates, the difficulties and the restraints that puts on the job that you had to deal with in the last administration that maybe have to be dealt with this time around as well?
Well, it shouldn't really matter in government whether you're confirmed or not, but it does. It does when you're talking to appropriations, when you're talking to the Senate oversight committees. If you're a confirmed leader, that matters to them because they've had an opportunity to advise and consent on your position. And then over time, if you don't have someone at that level, it restricts the agency's credibility, capability, and it just depends on what the leadership is. Under Trump 1, and obviously now under Trump 2, if people are acting in their roles, they have the full faith and authority given to them by the president, because we know, as it relates to border security, homeland security, in the DHS space, he's a very enthusiastic supporter of the front line and the leadership as well.
If the Democrats keep this up and they keep up obstruction, which there's no indication that they'll change that, is there any limit to the amount of time that someone can serve in an acting capacity as opposed to a confirmed? Or could someone serve for 4 years?
There are a lot of rules about that. They were written in the aftermath of Obama's midnight recess appointments in 2013 or 14. And so there are restrictions about actors in certain roles, especially in the department, the one I know the most. But there's also ways that, with smart lawyers in the Justice Department and in each of the departments, that you can make things happen when you need to.
Now, the Democrats, I think, aren't the only people who are upset about this sudden change and reversal in the border policy that we've seen over the last 4 years. The cartels, I imagine, are feeling the squeeze. They've got to be taking some shots to their wallet. President Trump, in an interview with Glenn Beck last night for BlazeTV, mentioned that there had been skirmishes along the border. You're a former agent, you're in touch with them. Has there been outbreaks of violence and shooting, and have people been hurt? What's it actually look like down the border where these billions and billions of dollars worth of criminal organizations with weapons are now feeling the squeeze?
Yeah, to set the scene, I don't know exactly about these particular things that the president was referring to. We are on constant, we're constantly reminded of the violence that's perpetrated by cartels in Mexico, sometimes against our front line as well. And so there's 10,000 troops assigned from the Department of Defense alongside the Border Patrol at the line, reinforcing the wall, helping get access to the border, side by side with agents, making sure we're monitoring the border and getting full situational awareness and being able to arrest people as they come across. And so that's something that we have to constantly be vigilant for. And I would just say the Trump effect in Mexico is something I've never seen. They also have 10,000 National Guard troops deployed near the northern border. We are helping them on the military to military relationship and helping them understand the capabilities of the cartels as they bring things to the border and as they bring proceeds back into their country. And so there's a really good partnership there that, again, I've never seen Mexico do so much in such a little amount of time. Now, we can't depend on Mexico. We can't outsource these problems for them. But having a willing partner and having somebody in the Oval Office that stands behind, we say we're going to do something and we're going to keep those promises, it's amazing what you can do on the ground.
What do you think's changed in Mexico that it's allowed them to even if they wanted to, there's a state where they're outgunned in some ways by some of the cartels, to what's changed that made their president willing to actually take the risks for retribution and other things that the cartels can do to enforce Trump's border policies and American border policies?
Leadership. A new president, a secretary that understands the political connotations both in the U.S. and in Mexico, and then a willingness at some levels in Mexico to reduce the power, influence, and corruption, the violence that these cartels perpetrate against their citizens. And so you have to have all these things in combination. You have to have a will from the Oval Office that says we're going to fix this problem. We're going to give the front line the tools that they need, and willing partners in places like Mexico leaning in and saying, yeah, we're going to take it on with you because we know you're going to help us. So
if you read the New York Times, you'll come across stories that suggest that the weapons and the machine guns and other rifles and that the cartels are using are being supplied by the United States. By American gun manufacturers, by the Department of Defense. But the middleman seems to be missing from the headlines, which is we're sending those weapons off into the Mexican military, and they're ending up in the hands of cartels, whether through thievery or through corruption. The president said in the interview that they're coming across over and over again these weapons that they can trace back to the U.S. military through the Mexican military. What sort of work are you having to do with the military and these sorts of things? How does that impact trust and the ability to operate down there if our own weapons are being potentially brought to bear against our own men?
Well, we have to understand the capacity of the cartel, the corruption in Mexico, and what these criminal cartels will do to maintain their power base, maintain their business model at the border, within the country, and even in the United States. And so we have to be vigilant about how these weapons get transferred. We have to have a mechanism with the Mexican military to understand when inventory goes missing. But you're only going to have that when you have a leader in the White House that says, I want to help you fix this problem. If you don't fix this problem, there will be consequences in the case of tariffs or restrictions at the border, restrictions on their movement in the U.S., those kinds of things. And so it's a big problem. The guns in Mexico, proceeds going back to Mexico, is something that we can share with Mexico and do a lot, again, to reduce the capability of these cartels, both in their country and here.
When you see the soldiers south of the border who are charged, and the police who are charged with enforcement, charged with arrest, oftentimes they have to hide their identities because of retribution, because of being followed home, the threats to their family, their wives, their children, their parents. Has this reality yet, this dark reality, entered the United States to the point that you have to take those precautionary methods with our own law enforcement or their own Department of Defense, or is that still a line that the cartels have been unwilling to cross?
It's something that we need to be concerned about, right? They hide their identities in Mexico because they're not only going to be targets for corruption, but they'll be targets for lethal activity, right? They'll threaten police chiefs and leadership in the military and law enforcement in Mexico. They'll threaten them with killing their family, etc. So hiding their identity is important. We also suffer from corruption in the United States, and it's something that CBP, the front line of DHS, are constantly have to be vigilant against, to making sure that our employees are protected and that the corrupt influence is kept down to the absolute minimum, and then these threats that the cartels, both in the physical operation at the line, but also what you're talking about, influencing people's behavior through force and fear.
Phase one of the administration's plan has been to immediately deploy Coast Guard, deploy military, to deploy fencing, to continue building the wall, to try to bulk up Customs and Border Patrol and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. What does phase two, phase three look like? Where's the ramp up from here to make it a problem that's no more?
Yeah, so phase one has been successful, but all of the policy recommendations, all of the policy implementation needs to be backstopped in a number of ways. Authorities that the president is using via executive order need to be backstopped by Congress through legislation. And then resources in phase two are going to be really important. So ICE has embarked on the largest full-scale deportation operation against criminals in the United States than we've seen in my entire lifetime. And so that has to be scaled up. They're doing a really good job, but there's a lot more to do in that space specifically. They need resources to scale up the detention space that they have. Right now, as well as we're doing, I mean, we're winning on the border. We're winning even on the ICE operations, but it needs to be scaled up. It needs appropriations for it to scale up. And so phase two looks like sustainability, scaling up these capabilities and maintaining them over the long term.
I've seen numbers floating around between $200 billion and $150 billion, depending on negotiations, of money that's being requested to split between ICE and Customs and Border Patrol. And it seems like the Senate is they're less reluctant to give money to Customs and Border Patrol than they are to ICE, maybe because of the negative press they could get from the raids in their own cities. But how does what difference does it really make to your ability to enforce the border, how that money is diverted between CBP and ICE?
Well, if you want to have a comprehensive fix to what happens at the physical border and how it affects people in the interior of the United States, you have to do both. We're going to take all of the resources that Congress gives us and sustain what's happening now and solidify it. I think ICE is in the same situation. We can't continue to have tens of thousands of illegal gang members in a place like New York or Dallas, Houston, San Francisco, et cetera. That has to be taken on, and that's going to require resources as well. At the end of the day, you've got to do both of those things, because over the long term, that's what's going to secure America and make it safe again.
So the money that is required by CBP in particular, what is that money needed for? Remember, the Biden administration offered in their late legislative push, I think Republicans fell for, to provide funding for beds, to provide funding for more officers, but also there was a lot of other things buried in there, sanctuary policies, et cetera, and it was turned down. But when you feel that lack of resources, you mentioned detainment spaces, you mentioned beds, is it officers, is it weapons, is it technology? Where are these resources needed for phase two?
It's really all of it. I think the most expensive things are the physical operations at the border. So that's people. You got to have enough agents to do the work, infrastructure, access, and barriers at the line, and then the technology that helps minimize the workload on the individual agents so they can cover more ground with the tech that's near and at the wall. And so all of those things, we want enough resources to have full situational awareness at the border. What that means is we know exactly what's going on and where. And then 100% operational control, which means no one gets away from us once we see them cross the border illegally. That's a pretty expensive proposition, but it pays dividends that'll last generations.
During the first Trump administration, there was a lot of talk about how apparently walls don't keep people out. They don't have an impact. People go around them. The cartels can go under them. They'll go over them. But now that you've come back or on the border specifically, what is the impact that the areas that are walled, what impact is that having? Is it funneling illegal immigrants and human smuggling through other areas, or is it still a place that has to be closely monitored?
No, walls work wherever they are, and it improves the conditions of safety and security in both sides of the border. There's an example that from my career. When I first started in San Diego, there was very little wall fencing at the time. And there are now neighborhoods right along the border that used to be places that agents really couldn't go because it was so active and so many smuggling attempts and all kinds of narcotics in this area. Those neighborhoods on the U.S. side of the border are they have $1 million homes within them. They have shopping centers. They have safe neighborhoods and streets for their kids to play on. That didn't exist in 1985 when I started in the Border Patrol. On the Tijuana side of that same part of the border, it's also moved up the standard of living, the public safety, and the lifestyles that people can live, even though they're right next to the Mexico-U.S. border.
What are there still areas where the agents feel that they can't operate because of the dangers in the neighborhoods, the amount of civilians, the drugs, the gangs? Are there still places like that today within the United States?
I would say the physical challenges are mostly based on the geography and our ability to communicate. There are still places on the border where it's not communications from agent to base, agent to the dispatch center is not as reliable as we would like it to be as leadership. And then there are neighborhoods where people aren't big fans. But most of the people who live on the border that are not involved in smuggling, that are not, in the employ of the cartels, they know how valuable the Border Patrol is in their community as it relates to safety and security.
I know we have to wrap up in a minute. You're a busy man, but what's the difference that you're seeing between the cooperation of the different states? The border goes from blue California, which you just mentioned, all the way through red Texas. Are different governors giving you different levels of cooperation, or does that impact you less in the federal control zones?
Yeah, on the line, it's not as evident as it might be in the interior. But what we're seeing, this is, again, the Trump effect, right? We have New York helping ICE arrest 25 Tren de Aragua gang members in New York City yesterday. So wow. The mayor leaned in a while back. The rest of the city helped yesterday. We have Gavin Newsom talking about turning over a murderer, somebody that was convicted of manslaughter and got a very light sentence in California. You have the governor of the state talking about how he's going to arrange and facilitate that individual being turned over to ICE. And so even blue states are getting the message that the American people want to feel safe in their own states, their own neighborhoods, and their own communities. And so the needle is definitely moving in the right direction. A lot to do. The Justice Department needs to take on this whole idea of sanctuary jurisdictions, but there's a lot of momentum coming in the right direction.
It's fascinating. Ron Vitiello, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's be real. We know conservatives are winning. You can walk around Washington, D.C. right now, and you can tell that the momentum is on our side. But the fight's not over, and that's why BlazeTV exists. You know that we are known for the very bold voices that we have all across the platform, and we're here to provide real journalism. And we don't have that big tech filter. There's not going to be any spin here. BlazeTV, we're here to give you the unfiltered truth. So when you subscribe, you're not just going through and getting great content. You're also joining a movement, and that's why we need you. So for about $8 a month, it's basically a cup of coffee here in the city. You can go through and get your subscription for BlazeTV. If you go to blazetv.com/BNT, you're going to save $20 off your annual plan. It's blazetv.com/BNT. It's BlazeTV, unfiltered, unafraid, on demand. Well, we've taken the mandate out on the streets of Washington, D.C. We are on the other side now of the U.S. Capitol building, and we are overlooking the National Mall, and you can see the Washington Monument right behind us. It's one of my favorite places in all of D.C., Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of place that, everyone's going to come at all hours throughout the year to see the symbols of America written in stone at the National Mall.
Well, while we can see the Washington Monument, let's talk about the man himself, George Washington. We wouldn't be here without him. We look at the Washington Monument, and what does it say about him and the divided country that we have? How would he go through and maintain things the way that he did?
Well, the sad thing is, this is one of my favorite topics, by the way. I used to teach a session on Washington, still do, to a lot of the people who work in some of these buildings. And it's really easy to lose sight of who this man was and why he's still revered and why that monument is still there standing so high. And the first thing to realize is people know that he gave up power, right? Rather than become a king or a dictator, which he could have. He did not do that, and that's very rare throughout all of human history. But I think a lot of Americans forget how much power he had and what he did with it. So the Constitution would not be written unless George Washington was sitting in the room. The fact he was there gave it power. The fact he was there, he put his reputation on the line, even to be in the room, even after winning the war, right, with the men who wrote the Constitution, is why it became the law of the land. So consistently throughout his life, what he did was he used the power he has. And we don't understand the power he had today. I mean, he had the power to become king, let's just put it that way, but he put that into something, a system, a form of government that would outlast him, into something that was greater than himself. So if Washington stands for anything today, it's the idea of the Republican statesman who does have power and does wield power, but does so for the sake of an order that lasts longer than he does.
And we call him the indispensable man. Now, is that giving him too much credit? Is that giving him not enough credit? How do you view that term?
There's no way to say that it's too little. Without him, you really don't have a country. So people will mouth these words, father of the nation, father of the country. What does that mean? This is someone who, in 2 or 3 different ways, defines what America is. There is no America if you take him out of the picture. So, number one, someone has to win the war against one of the greatest empires in history, and these far-flung, eastern seaboard, these scattered people have to band together and pull that off. So how are you going to do that? Unity is exceptionally important. I mean, it wasn't just military prowess. It was the fact you had a bunch of guys who were sitting around in the snow, right, or in the muck, and their farm back home is, the clock is ticking, they're losing money, their wife's managing all of that, and they're not there to help, and no one's paying them. Congress, the lousy bums even back then, before this building existed, they weren't paying the soldiers, right? And he has to keep them. His person has to keep them there and win that war. And then, of course, afterwards, he is responsible for the Constitution because he puts his power into the guys who wrote that and that document and supports it, then becomes the first president and defines what that means. So indispensable, at least.
I wouldn't be a good co-host if I didn't ask you then, after you say this is your favorite topic, if you have a favorite George Washington story.
Yeah, so the way to understand Washington is not as some, demure person who just gives up power. He had power to give. And it's really hard to imagine what he was like when you see like the wig and all that. And, it's just kind of foreign to Americans now. But the best way to describe it is this story, I think. 2 of the most belligerent guys, young firecracker energies. Gouverneur Morris, who's forgotten, but he's one of the he's a kind of a scoundrel at the time, and Alexander Hamilton, who people do know, right? These are very ambitious guys. Morris is, in fact, he gets in trouble with the ladies. He's sort of not as well known because he, slept around a little bit back then. I hear that never happens here, but
not this town.
But yeah, Gouverneur Morris did. He had a peg leg because he was trying to escape. He was caught one time by a husband, and he had to get out the window and escape. And he was run over in the street. And John Jay, who was a very good man, one of the founders, he said, I wish it had cut off another part of his body so he wouldn't keep getting in trouble. And that's Morris, right? But Morris is also very, very smart. He helps design the Constitution and the executive power. And he's sitting there with Alexander Hamilton. And Hamilton, of course, reveres Washington almost as his father, as a father figure. And these are 2 of the most ambitious men in the world, right, at the time. And Morris says to Hamilton, he says, you know what? I could treat George Washington just like I could treat any other man. Doesn't matter, I could treat Washington just like I treat any other man. And Hamilton looks at him and says, okay, that's great. Like, you know what? I'll bet you dinner. I will bet you dinner and drinks that's not going to work well for you. And you won't do it. And I'm not going to do it. And Gouverneur Morris says, no, I'm going to do it. He says, okay, he takes the bet. So the next day, they all come in the room to present themselves to Washington. And there's 2 versions of this story. And just like he promised, Gouverneur Morris goes up to Washington and he slaps him on the back and says, good morning, George. How's it going? Something along those lines. And what happens next is the whole room turns quiet. Washington just slowly turns at him and stares him in the eyes. And he just shrinks, kind of like that Homer Simpson meme, like into the background. And he says afterwards, I'll never do anything like that again. And he doesn't have to say anything, right? For these 2 ambitious guys, they know you don't even mess with him in that way at all.
A scoundrel and a peg leg. I didn't know we were going to get that in that story, but I absolutely
Welcome to the mandate.
When we were here a few weeks ago, we had a nice Saturday afternoon, and we decided, you know what are we going to do with our time here in Washington, D.C.? We're going to walk along the National Mall. You're a guy who loves architecture, history, meaning. What do you see when you see the National Mall and in the place that it sits with America and what it stands for?
It's so meaningful to me personally, like so many other Americans, because you can physically walk the history of the United States. And so you see it all. You see ideas and you see the history laid out before you. You see, if there's no union, right? If there's no union, as tragic and brutal as the Civil War is there a country that wins World War II? And that monument's there. And then you see the tragedies of Vietnam. You see the tragedies of Korea. But then you also see the actual, forms of government. So you see George Washington in his memorial staring across, right, at that White House, looking into the White House, and Congress looking out, all the way over to the Lincoln Memorial. So to me, it's so important that you get out and walk this, that you see it and think about it, and that Americans continue to come here, because this is the kind of thing that a lot of people want to tear down. And they started to tear it down a few years ago. So we need to preserve it, we need to celebrate it, we need to cherish it.
So how do people just go through? I mean, we see a ton of people out here right now. It's a beautiful day in our nation's capital. How do people just stay connected with the country when they're walking through the National Mall?
Well, I mean, first off, I encourage you to come here. Washington is going through a sort of cultural turn. It's very different than it was in the last few years. It's really become, to me, kind of a magical place at this point. And there's some amazing things happening here, even culturally. They're starting to clean things up. So first off, you have to get here and you have to look around and walk around and see it. Second, it helps to know something about something, right, before you come, so you know some history, or have someone with you who's that nerd, right, who can come along and point things out. That's correct. And then when you need to take your family, like you need to talk about it. You need to go and see these things, put your phone down on a beautiful day like today, and talk about what you're looking at and what you're seeing.
Well, let's wrap this up with George Washington once again and his farewell address and just the warnings that he gives to the American people. Yeah,
I mean, the farewell address is an incredible document. Everyone should go back and read it. It says all kinds of things that are totally relevant today, ripped out of today's headlines, talking about foreign policy. But even just his actual farewell address, in my mind, is not even that document. It's the fact that they wanted to bury him across from us at the Capitol. And when you go to the crypt at the Capitol, they show you where Washington was supposed to be buried. But he said, and it's the center of the district, it's the center of Washington, D.C., and he said, no, that's weird. I need to go back to my farm, even in death, just as he did in life. And that really is his last address to us, is that I'm not buried here. I am buried on my farm. This is a Republican form of government. But the actual farewell address is something that speaks to foreign policy, especially today, in such a powerful way, because he says, don't get entangled, right? Just worry about America. It really is America first. Don't get entangled with all these foreign alliances. Be very careful about that. And he warns us against doing so.
I love it. Our Glenn Beck has George Washington's compass, right? And he always goes through and says, oh, you can feel the grooves.
I have felt it.
Where George was thinking, right? And he was just rubbing on the compass, and there it is right there. And yet, I'll just let you guys in on a little secret. Sometimes that compass goes missing, right? Sometimes Glenn will put it in his pocket and he doesn't know. And yet here is one of the most historic places, one of the most historic people possibly in the entire country, the founding of the country. We would not be here if not for one George Washington. And then yet, Glenn just sometimes misplaces it. It's so funny to me that it's so valuable.
The fact that he has it is incredible, because Washington was a surveyor. That's what he did. So he had this from the time he was 14. And you can feel the worn grooves in it. He has many stories about like Glenn having it, right? And as almost like a totem, a token in certain times of his life that were meaningful. So very powerful when he gives you that to hold. And then he also has Washington's glasses, and he tells some incredible stories involved Washington's glasses, which you don't have time for here today. But I mean, the thing that Glenn understands is exactly what I'm trying to articulate about the National Mall. And I think he understands it better than most people alive, and that is that the physical history, right, the physical manifestation of history is so important. And that's why this city is important. It's not just, abstraction. It's like it's embodied here, the history of America and the principles of America.
And only Glenn Beck can go to the Smithsonian and be like, you know what? I have more documents. I have more things. American Journey Experience is a great place to go. He owns that. He has a great private collection of America's founding history as well. But what a great way to spend a day here in Washington, D.C.
It's incredible. One of my favorite things to do.
We'll have more on The Mandate. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back right after this.
They keep us pretty busy when we come to Washington, D.C., and we are very happy because we got to spend a whole day basically on Podcast Row. And guys, I don't know about you, but I thought that the setup there was excellent and kind of exceeded my expectations.
Oh yeah, I mean they really treated us right today, right? We had a great room, and it was interesting to see all the people who are cycling in, because there's a lot of people who are just independent names in media who are just starting to come, twice a month, showing up to the White House and being part of this new media. And I mean, we're spoiled really at this point, and we're just seeing this new world. But it would be astounding. Like, now, again, one of those things a year or two ago, no one would have believed. Right, they were there with
that Blaze Media
Dr.
would have been
Drew
given
and Blaze Media, or hanging out in the beginning of the day, looking for their room to go in and do media with the White House. But this is, I said this last night, this little talk I gave. This is exactly what needs to happen, because it's breaking down the entire old prestige system and the ecosystem that really was corrupt before. Doesn't mean that the new stuff has to arrive, but it feels like a brand new world.
There's more opportunities now, I mean, to get ahead, to excel, to make a name for yourself, to get those interviews, to get those stories. And I was just talking about this with a reporter from another outlet earlier today about how there's no comparison to the access and the helpfulness of the press office. Unfortunately, the press office's job, their job is to kind of be really helpful so you don't find the unhelpful people and talk to them. And the reporter's job is to find those unhelpful people. You went around me? Yes, I did. But they reach right back out, and to compare that to the Biden White House, or even the Bush White House, where they didn't want you in the meetings, they didn't want you around, they didn't. If you had no access whatsoever, and this White House, it's just completely different.
Yeah, it was great to have the access there for Podcast Row today. We had Rebecca Zelko on the show yesterday. She was in the roundtable discussion with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Rebecca made note that she was 2 people away from the secretary, and the New York Times was all the way down at the end of the table. So it is great to see how far we've come as a news organization in the eyes of the White House. But it's also fun to see, Matthew, remember the last times that we were here in January for the inauguration. We were here back again in February, and we walked around the same building at that time in February. And it was so funny to us. One of the things that we kept remarking on was the fact that the administration was so fresh, so new, that they still had Post-it notes on the door, right? It would be door 205, and it would say scheduling on a Post-it note, right, above whatever the Biden administration had for that room. But the Trump organization, they were like, no, we're going to make this exactly how we want it. We're going to make sure that everything is efficient. But it's cool to see now, right? We talked about the skeleton crew, basically, that they were running on. People actually getting through in filling out that building and seeing just that next step for the administration.
Yeah, I mean, it's not being here as Chris is continuously. You kind of come in and take a measure of what you find and what you see. And as we reported out to you earlier, you could see, the excitement, but it was still really nation stages. And I think the reason that people don't realize how long it takes to put the team together is because they were doing so much. It was a good reason, right? I mean, it wasn't camouflage. They were doing so much so fast when it came to executive orders, et cetera. People almost forgot. Confirmations usually take a long time, and actually they did a really good job getting a really historically good job getting a lot of people confirmed. And this time around, just in the discussions and kind of what we've been able to see and experience, you can feel that the plane has ascended. Like we're starting to move now, and so the types of problems and obstacles that people are facing are very different. People are settling in, and you still again have people getting confirmed very recently and coming in, but there's something changing now, and it's moving into a different phase after this first 100 days, and that's why everyone wants to take stock. The whole point of the podcast. Row this week. Everything's about the 100 days that we're going to celebrate that anniversary. people for years. We'll talk about that time period. But, moving forward, you're entering a different phase. And that was reflected in some of our interviews and some of the private conversations we had this week.
And that's why we got our own Glenn Beck to make his way out to Washington, D.C. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, we're very excited to see it. So, Bedford, in the time that we have left, let's go back to that because you were there in the room. Just give us the mood of that room and what you saw from Glenn and President Trump.
He was relaxed. They talked like two old friends. They talked like people who speak often, and they do speak more and more often. They talked beforehand about cars. They talked about shared interest in cool vehicles. And at the end, this is rare, very rare. The president offered Glenn and his wife a tour of the Lincoln bedroom, which is not part of the publicly accessible area. It's in the private residence. And that just shows a familiarity and a respect and a personalness between them and a comfort level between them. That's fantastic. I mean, I've been shown some cool things by the president in the past, but never that one. And, I tried to sneak on because they were walking away and I go, oh, I would like to maybe tag along with this. But Secret Service was on to me. They're like, oh, where are you heading? Well, heading back to the press office, actually.
Well, Chris, I'm going to need you to do better because we are hanging by your coattails here in this city. So if you can't get in, there's no chance for us, and we need to do that.
I'm not used to being entourage. There's a strange feeling. It's like I was like a character in a movie. I was just hanging out and helping out. And, it was just a great interactions between them. They for a familiarity that's really been developing between them. It's pretty great to have a president now who's been here. Been on the world stage for 9 years now. So you could say he's the most famous living person on the planet, most recognizable for sure. And there's been another couple ahead. And just like to Matt's point, a lot of the conversation now has moved beyond planning, even moved beyond phase one. People are starting to talk about what's phase two. You've had the shock and awe, you've had this and you've had that. You've done some really good things, but now you've taken the beach. You need to expand beyond it, and there's big battles ahead. After Normandy, there were the hedgerows. There's a whole lot of stuff that's going to be coming ahead. These lawsuits, what's coming down with them, and I'm really looking forward to the next 100 days.
Well, it's going to be boys' night out in Washington, D.C., so I wish you two well. I hope that you, have fun. Keep yourself.
Have we never ever
safe?
not have fun? Did we ever not have fun?
I don't want to be the one phone call if there is one. I don't want that, but I look forward to seeing you all back here tomorrow.
No, you got to take your time in the drunk tank with like a man, like a man. You don't use the phone call.
You take your time until you sober up, and that's what we will do. But I will say, before this term is over,
All right.